determined to win this race because I think so much is at stake, that our very democracy is literally at stake right now.
Hello and welcome to The Moment. I'm Brad LaPlante, political reporter at WLNS. And each week, I invite one of the most interesting players in Michigan politics in for a chat. This week, my guest is former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. Brink was initially appointed U.S. Ambassador to Slovakia in 2019 during Donald Trump's first term. She is running for the Democratic nomination for Michigan's 7th congressional district in Ingham County and the surrounding area that includes Michigan's capital city. Brink left her post during the beginning stages of Trump's second presidency, after she became concerned with the country's favorable attitude towards Russia. And during our conversation, we will discuss foreign policy and why Bridget Brink believes that democracy is at stake during this election. Here is my interview with Bridget Brink. Thank you for joining the first in-person episode of The Moment. I think that's a pretty special honor.
That's a big honor. Thanks a lot, Brad. Great to be here.
Just to start with your background, right? You're a former diplomat. You were the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, and before that, you were the U.S. Ambassador to Slovakia, a position that you were actually appointed to by President Donald Trump, right? A Republican. How does it shape your views on American power and responsibility?
Well, I was really proud to have a 28-year career serving the American people and working under 5 presidents to promote our values and our interests around the world. And specifically for me, my focus was on Europe and Greater Europe. And I spent and dedicated my life to promoting freedom and democracy in the countries that were former communist countries after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And to me, it was a big responsibility to be the representative of the American people and to represent and work with 5 different presidents in order to serve our interests. And when it came time that I could no longer do that in good conscience, I made the decision to resign, speak out, and come back home to Michigan to run for Congress.
And what specifically were you frustrated with as an ambassador to Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I can say I was very proud of the service that I did for 3 years, leading our on-the-ground effort to deter Russia's full-scale invasion. And for those 3 years, together with a team of very brave public servants, we helped Ukraine to get half of the territory back from Russia that had been seized at the beginning of the war. We helped the Ukrainians keep the economy running during a full-scale invasion. We also helped keep the energy grid alive over 3 winters of Putin's bombing and shelling of energy infrastructure. But when President Trump came to office, and I saw very quickly that he wanted to make a deal with Putin and essentially appease Putin, it was very clear to me that I could not, in good conscience, carry out that policy, and I had to resign and speak out and come home.
And when you were serving in this role, just maybe over the course of it, whether it was Ukraine, Slovakia, or otherwise, what do you think the biggest thing that maybe you learned about bureaucracies and policy, whether good or bad?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. That I think the biggest thing I was always proud to do, and I think people like me who are serving, whether it's in our diplomatic corps, whether serving our military, do it not to align themselves to a political party, but they do it out of love of country and out of a belief in our founding values. And what I learned over a career in diplomacy is that we can and must use American power to support our values and our interests around the world. And that is good for us back home in Michigan. We need and want countries that are strong democracies, open markets, good trading partners, allies that we can work with to solve national security problems around the world. That's good for all of us. And that's what I learned. And in my time working for 5 different presidents, I always felt that I did that until I didn't. And that's why I left.
You served in the middle of Russia's offense on Ukraine. And I mean, that must have been hard to serve. I mean, you're probably away from your family for an extended period of time. There's a lot of risk in being in an environment like that. Was there a moment when you were serving in Ukraine that maybe shaped how you view service and risk?
I think being asked to do a job like that, and for me, it was a big honor to be asked to lead our team because I had a very solemn responsibility for the life and safety of the people who worked with me there, the Americans who were there, and also to carry out the president's policy. It really showed me what government can do, and I remained very laser focused on our goal, on what we were trying to do in terms of executing the policy, and to do it efficiently, and to show that government can work and deliver, and we can do that on a platform that is civilian. We did not have a military platform like the conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and I'm really proud to be the first woman to lead a mission in a war zone. And we did it for 3 years and we were very successful. But what I saw happening back home and why I'm back here now is that we also need people to feel here that government delivers. And my goals are very simple in running in this race, which I think is one of the most important races in the country for the midterm elections, is to help lower costs, make healthcare more affordable, and defend our rights and freedoms. And part of that includes ensuring that what we're seeing happening in Washington, the corruption and the chaos, is defeated, and that we have leaders in D.C. who have an agenda to clean up Washington and restore people's faith in government, that government delivers for them.
I think that a lot of people are frustrated with the way that the U.S. is handling some of its relationships with allies. I mean, whether you see
Yes.
the Greenland talks that Trump has floated, taking Greenland, whether it's the friendliness to Russia that you have seen, or even a lot of people are frustrated with the friendliness to Israel, with their offense in Gaza. And I think that people aren't satisfied with the way that the U.S. is handling these foreign affairs. I'm wondering how you square, conflicts abroad with morality and diplomacy.
hmm Well, first of all, I would say is that one thing I've learned in government is that you never accomplish anything alone. I think that applies at home and it applies overseas. And it's impossible for me to understand why our president and our government is turning its back on our allies and partners of decades. The peace and security that we have enjoyed since World War II has largely been because of the powerful alliances, including our security alliance of NATO, including the alliance that we have with the EU, which is our largest trading partner, including with these countries that have deep histories of democracy, shared values. We're rejecting all of those, and we are cozying up to Russia and dictators and countries that are our adversaries. It makes no sense to me. And I think it is not a way to make us powerful in the world. And it will be a cold and lonely place for the United States if we're going to go at everything alone.
If you were in Congress, is there anything that you would do almost immediately that would change or advocate for a large change in U.S. policy? Like, what do you think is one of the most important things that we're doing right now that we shouldn't be doing, or vice versa?
Yeah. I mean, two things that I think we should be immediately for. One is to clean up the corruption and chaos that's happening in Washington. What we have seen, what's been reported widely, is that President Trump and his family and friends and allies have gained $4 billion in wealth since the beginning of this administration. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we need to clean it up. And I have a proposal. It's the Restore and Reform Agenda, which has a number of important steps that we can immediately take to stop self-dealing by Congress, in the White House, or by anyone who has the charge of being responsible to the American people. That's really important. It includes things like banning stock trading. It includes things like stopping the revolving door between Congress and lobbying firms. It includes things like overturning Citizens United to help clean up campaign finance, among other things. That's one thing I think we need to do right away. And I do think there's bipartisan support to do this, but it needs to get done. The second thing, and this is also in the foreign policy area is we need Congress to stand up and do its job, including take back the power of putting tariffs in place and stopping these reckless, indiscriminate tariffs, which are hurting Michiganders, which are hurting our country. I hear from the farmers. I hear from the auto workers. I hear from the average person just in the grocery store that the tariffs are having a terrible effect. They are the things that are raising prices for all of us, and including the fact that Canada is Michigan's largest trading partner. And those tariffs are so unpredictable. I don't even know what tariff it is, depending on the day. So Congress needs to stand up and take that power back. Those are two concrete things that we need to do. But I also think on other issues, including on healthcare, we need to extend the ACA subsidies. These are the subsidies that were taken away, and since January 1st, people's health insurance has doubled or more. We also need to reverse the things in the big ugly bill, which are making healthcare more expensive overall and taking Medicaid away from people. And we need to find a way to have a public option for healthcare so that people actually can afford healthcare, and there isn't this lost generation of people who fall through the cracks. We have to fix that, and that's going to be good for our entire country.
You know, the healthcare thing you bring up is interesting because, as you are well aware, I'm sure everybody is, Michigan's U.S. Senate race is one of the most watched in the country, right? Because it's an open seat. Gary Peters is retiring, and somebody else is going to come in. And right now, there's a battle in Michigan between an establishment favored candidate like Haley Stevens, and then you have Abdul El Sayed, who's been a progressive endorsed by Bernie Sanders, that side of the Democratic Party. And then in the middle, you have, Mallory McMorrow has been kind of doing a little bit of both. And the thing that's interesting to me, I think most about this race is their policy on healthcare. And I think that the public option thing is something that McMorrow has talked about, and that's what she's running on. And then Stevens a little bit has advocated for that, but not as upfront. But I think that, El Sayed is kind of they got into a bit of a spat a couple weeks ago about the healthcare policy and and obviously I'm not asking you to take sides here, but I think that, El Sayed was criticized for his, he's branding, he wants Medicare for all, but then he's saying that, what if we had, a federal single payer health plan that was guaranteed, and then if you wanted supplemental healthcare coverage, that would be that would be an option for you. And so it's kind of the other way around. Like, I think a lot of people talk about this public option, and it's almost like, yes, you can get private health insurance, like that will still exist.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you want to sign on to something, a public option would be there for you. Why don't we think about this as, instead of a public option, why don't we think about it as a public guaranteed, but a private option? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like, I'm just curious if you've ever thought about that. And I just want to know, like El Sayed was criticized for this because he was shifting his view, and that's not what Medicare was designed to be. But I don't think, could it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, my goal and what I will fight to do in Congress is help to make healthcare more accessible and affordable. And I can just say this is very personal to me. Over the summer, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 1 breast cancer, and I was fortunate because I was able to have it removed with outpatient surgery, and I'm now cancer-free. But my surgery, thank you, my surgery was over $100,000 for outpatient surgery. That's crazy. And that's affecting me. And for breast cancer, it affects 1 in 8 women will hear that they have breast cancer in their lifetime. We need to fix this. We need to make healthcare more affordable and accessible. I would support a public option. That's what I believe is the way to do this. I think we have to keep in mind also that Social Security and Medicare are going to be insolvent by 2033. That's actually not far from now. And we have to make sure that, especially for seniors and those who have paid into Medicare and Social Security their entire lives, continue getting those benefits. And I would look at it in a way that's holistic and in a way that gets to the result of more accessible and affordable healthcare.
A lot of people are concerned with, across the board, Democratic backsliding. They're afraid, they see what's happening in Minnesota, especially too. And, you're a former diplomat. You have a lot of experience in seeing other countries and sort of the rise and the fall of these countries and things like that. I'm wondering, do you see warning signs from maybe your experience abroad in the US or in Michigan or both?
hmm This is a great question. 100% yes, I do. When you look at what's happening with political pressure being put on the media, on free media in our country, on businesses, on universities, when we see that the justice system is being weaponized against perceived political opponents, we see this against our senator, we see this against other elected officials, we see this against others. When we see masked, out of control federal agents on our city streets killing U.S. citizens on video, this is a huge warning sign. I spent my career in countries where they had young democracies and where I supported all of the basic foundations that helped make us such a great, strong country that we are. Free press, right to assemble, due process, independent judges, rule of law, human rights. These are the foundations of democracy. And I never believed that these things could be at risk in our own country. I never believed it. I was a public servant for 28 years. I never believed all of these things could be at risk at home. But the fact of the matter is, our eyes don't lie, and what we are seeing is a risk to our very democracy right now. I can tell you that for me, I can't come at this race, and I am determined to win this race because I think so much is at stake. I believe not only being able to deliver for our district, but that our very democracy is literally at stake right now.
And I want to pivot a little bit more to how maybe you view Michigan's current delegation. I'm wondering how you view the delegation currently as it stands, and are there any current members of Congress, maybe overall, that maybe you admire?
Well, I would say, first of all, the challenge that we have right now is that Democrats are shut out of the House, the Senate, and the White House, which means Democrats in Washington, including our own delegation, are out of power and unable to set the agenda. So at most, what Democrats can do is react. That's one thing we must change. And this seat, the 7th Congressional District, is going to be one of those seats that makes the Democrats the majority in the House. That's why it's so important. I think if I look at, especially, focus maybe on the Republican delegation, but specifically Tom Barrett, who represents this district. And what I would say is that he is not representing the district. He is not taking votes that actually serve the district. And I'll give you a couple examples. The Big Ugly Bill, which passed in the summer, took Medicaid off of 25,000 people in our district. It won't take effect until after the midterms, but that is what is going to happen. He voted against, late last year, extending the ACA subsidies, which has meant since January 1st, tens of thousands of people in our district are paying more, some even double or more, for their health insurance. And third, he voted very early on to give Trump the emergency powers so that he could put in place the tariffs, which have affected Canada, which have affected Michiganders acutely, including farmers and others, by raising the prices for all of us. His votes do not reflect or represent the district. And the reason I'm running is to be the person who doesn't salute to whoever is president, but who effectively represents the needs and the issues of our district. That's what I intend to do. And in Congress, that's what I will do.
We're recording this on February 8th, and there has been a lot of talk about elections and election fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how closely you've been following Michigan's elections, but Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson has recently taken a lot of heat from the Republican Party because they are accusing her of letting non-citizens vote and having non-citizens on the voter rolls. And to be fair, she has said that Michigan's elections are safe and secure, and Republicans do have incentive to go after her because she's running for the state governorship, right? So that is a big piece of this. And I think that when you look at Tom Barrett, who holds the seat that you're challenging for. If we look back to Barrett at the 2 days before the January 6th insurrection on the U.S. Capitol, he pushed to delay the 2020 election results. That was a time, by the way, where the Michigan Supreme Court had already rejected claims of fraud in the election. And then you have Mike Rogers, who a little bit separately is claiming that the 2024 election was swung in the favor of Alyssa Slotkin. And, they're with no evidence. It's a baseless claim. And reached out for evidence. There's no response. And so I think that you're seeing a lot of, I don't know if I would call it fear mongering or but it certainly is making people nervous about our election system. And then Trump this week said that there's a lot of fraud going on in Detroit. The entire GOP delegation also this week sent Benson a letter to tell her she's eroding public confidence in the election system. The Michigan GOP has actually requested federal oversight of Michigan's 2026 elections. And for a lot of people, this can be very scary because it's, it kind of begs the question, what role does the federal government have in overseeing our elections, which are typically run at the state and county level? And so I'm wondering for you, like, do you see this as a warning sign, kind of alluding to back to our previous discussion about, foreign governments and how they've fallen? And what do you think the federal government's role should be in election oversight?
I'm absolutely worried. I think we all should be worried, especially because of the other things we just talked about in terms of erosion of democratic foundations and standards that have taken place under the Trump administration. I take President Trump at his word. I think he wants to nationalize elections. My view is our election process has not only been successful, but also trusted because it's decentralized. It is not controlled by the federal government, nor do I believe that it should be. I think this should be controlled by local officials, and I have full confidence in our local officials to stand up and fight for elections and to make sure that our elections are free and fair. And that doesn't have anything to do with their political party. I just think for us as Michiganders, and what I know with the local election officials, whether in Ingham County where I live or across the 7th District, I believe people feel strongly that we are responsible for our own elections, and they are considered free and fair and clean. And that's how it needs to be, and it should not be changed.
How do you see this race? And do you think that, Barrett, it seems like I don't want to obviously put words in his mouth, but there's a little bit of him backing away from the Trump agenda, there's these transparency things like the term limits on the federal court system and things like that. Do you think that this seat is competitive? As it seems bipartisan, obviously.
I think the seat's absolutely competitive, and I also think it's really one of the most important seats to determine the House majority, which is why I hope that people will come out and vote. With regard to Tom Barrett, I would say he's not backing away from the Trump policy. He's actually voting in line with the policy of the majority of the Republicans right now in backing Trump on every single step, whether it's the big ugly bill, whether it's the ACA subsidies, whether it's giving the power to extend tariffs, whether it's enabling the kinds of things that we've seen in Minneapolis, including out-of-control federal agents. I don't see him at all stepping out of line, and I think there's one simple reason. He's funded by special interests in Washington and others who have an interest in keeping his vote and keeping him voting alongside the rest of the Republican Party that's going along with all of these things that President Trump is doing. My belief is that we need, in this moment, a leader who is going to go to Washington and stand up to President Trump, no matter what the consequences are, risking the career or the future in a way that represents and reflects the will of the district. I've done this before. I'll do it again. That's what I'll do when I go to Congress. The second thing that I think is very important for this role is having someone who actually can deliver and who has the proven track record of delivering in very tough environments. Based on my career, working with the White House, working with many members of Congress over a 30-year time frame, I know how to create coalitions, how to negotiate. I spent a career working on policy formation and execution. I know that I can do what needs to be done so that we have lower costs, better health care, defending our rights and our freedoms. And finally, I'm really proud. I served overseas representing our country, but I'm really proud of my Michigan roots. And my family goes back 6 generations in this district exactly. And my grandparents met here. My mom was born here. She's proudly a Michigan State graduate. When I decided I could no longer keep serving, I decided immediately to come back home. And I'm really happy to be here with my husband, with my kids, and do what I can to keep serving my community and our country. And I think that's what's needed right now.
And this transparency agenda, I believe two of your proposals would have required constitutional amendments.
Yes.
I know was one of them term limits. Forgive me if I'm remembering. Maybe you could spout the ones off that do.
Sure. It's establishing term limits for members of Congress, and it's also overturning Citizens United to stop the dark money that is coming into all races. I'm not a politician, and when I first started to run, I had no idea how much money is in all these races.
I've seen the financial reports. I will look at them all day.
It's astounding. It's astounding. Yeah. And for someone who spent my life working with politicians, I had no idea what it meant and how much time and energy has to be spent on raising money. We need to make it more about the people that we're trying to serve. And right now it is not, when millions of dollars are being poured into races in ways that don't necessarily reflect the will of the community. So I believe my reform agenda is a way to do this.
How realistic do you think that those two things are, right? I mean, Citizens United, I think, is very popular, right? Like, there are a lot of people who are very upset with Citizens United. And I think term limits as well. These are very popular things. I've looked up the polling, and some of them are like 70-80% support. It's quite a popular thing. The biggest barrier, of course, is the constitutional amendment, right? You need 3/4 of Congress, and then you need, or is it 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states?
Yes.
So our Constitution is very hard to amend. It's very hard to change. The last amendment was actually Michigan ratified the 27th Amendment in 1992. So I think that some people see this as almost symbolic as a proposal from you, being that it would be very unrealistic. Do you see it that way?
I don't. I think we're at a very dangerous and critical moment in our country, the most dangerous of my lifetime. And I think people are seeing that. And I think you can only look at Minneapolis in the month of January to see that something is horribly wrong. And that's just one example of many that I think make us, and make me at least, believe that it is possible to do what some people may have thought is the impossible, because we have to fix a broken system.
The trading stocks ban, even if legislation isn't advanced and put into law that would ban members of Congress from trading stocks, do you vow to not trade stocks while you're in Congress?
I mean, I put out this proposal in order to pass it. So my full intention is to get as much of it, if not all of it, passed as quickly as possible. And I will abide by every single rule that we pass. Not only that, I spent 28 years under very strict rules. This is in part what I modeled this after as a government official. And I intend to live by all of those rules every minute and serve only the people of our community.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Bridget Brink, for joining The Moment.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Now, I want to turn to U.S. Representative Haley Stevens, a Democrat serving an area that includes Birmingham, Michigan. Last week, Stevens toured an ICE facility in Baldwin, Michigan, in the northern Lower Peninsula. A 56-year-old Bulgarian national named Nenko Ganchev died there in December after being found unresponsive on the floor of his cell. ICE has characterized his death publicly as, quote, suspected natural causes, but the case is currently under investigation pending a full autopsy. Last week, Stevens and Hillary Skolton, who represents Grand Rapids in the U.S. House, toured the facility in Baldwin, which is the largest ICE detention facility in the Midwest. Stevens and Skolton both noted that this was a, quote, sanitized visit in which facility staff knew they were coming. Here is my conversation with Haley Stevens as she talks me through that tour and what reforming ICE would look like. Can you walk me through your visit to the ICE Baldwin and tell me what your biggest takeaways were from that visit?
I left with more questions than answers. I went out there after conducting a congressional inquiry into the death of a man. We still haven't gotten answers around that. There were 100 people who signed up to speak with me, with Congresswoman Skolton, who I went with. We were only allowed to talk to 4 people. I talked to a pregnant woman crying her eyes out. She has an 18-month-old back in Southeast Michigan. She didn't know why she was there. People kept asking us why they were there. It was heartbreaking. It was infuriating. And it speaks to these unbelievable actions that are coming down from this administration, that are so mismanaged, that are such an overreach. And it's why I cannot go forward with the funding package, obviously, and why Kristi Noem has got to go.
Did you see anything at the Baldwin facility that contradicts what ICE or the GEO group have said publicly about conditions?
Look, it felt like it was a sanitized visit. It was cut short. The last individual we spoke to expressed that he was afraid to tell us his truth and his experience in front of somebody from GEO because he didn't want retribution. He had been there since July. He doesn't know when he's getting out. It felt like it was a sanitized visit. And there weren't questions answered about expansion. We see what's going on in Romulus and in Southfield. I specifically asked about that and was gaslighted. I'm outraged by what I saw.
Maybe for people who don't, I'm not a lawmaker. I'm sure a lot of people listening aren't lawmakers. They don't know what these oversight visits are. Some people didn't even know that, lawmakers have that responsibility to oversee some of these facilities. And you mentioned it's a sanitized visit. I'm wondering, ultimately it is your job, right, or your right to oversee these facilities. And you mentioned that you were only allowed to speak with certain people. Is there a point at which that you guys, you and Skolton can be like, I want to talk with more people, like this isn't going to work? Or is that something that is just not in the cards?
We're absolutely pushing for more answers and more conversations. And a week out since that visit, I've connected with more stakeholders, more stories. They claim that the average length of stay was 48 days. This is a prison. 90% of the people that are being taken by masked agents without badges, without IDs, they're not criminals. The people I talked to had been caught in legal loopholes. They were asking about their cases. It's just a complete overreach, and it's not acceptable.
When you talk about reforming ICE, I'm curious what that means specifically.
Well, we need to see the masks go. We need to require badges and identification. The taxpayer money, and you asked about this. I'm a lawmaker. I pass federal legislation, I appropriate federal dollars, and I conduct oversight, congressional inquiry. What is going on with your federal taxpayer dollars? $75 billion in Trump's big, beautiful bill to plus up to ICE. Your money. Is it making us safer? It's creating chaos. Redirect that money to local law enforcement. That's what I'm supporting. That's legislation that I'm on. That's something that I want to see. I feel very strongly that a Senate confirmed Secretary of Department of Homeland Security is responsible for this mess. She's in dereliction of duty. She has lied to the American people. She has gaslit Congress. She has to resign or be impeached. She has got to go. We need to clean this up. We need accountability as well. If crimes are committed by agents, we need prosecutions. We need to have accountability as well.
How long did that tour take about?
We got 3 hours. We were originally supposed to get 4.
Okay. And I'm wondering about what you learned in Baldwin. What specific reforms would you push about around detention regarding mental health care?
Yeah, I specifically asked about mental health care and the medical services. I did have a chance to talk to a woman in the healthcare unit, the woman who was pregnant, who has an 18-month-old child as well, 4.5 hours away. She was 2-3 days into her stay. She was completely shaken. We did not have a chance to speak with mental health professionals. And look, this is a whole system. Why are people being taken from our neighborhoods in broad daylight? Why are families not getting answers? Why are legal loopholes not being closed? Why are we deporting Purple Heart veterans in the United States of America? You know, people play by the rules, pay their taxes, going through the visa process. These aren't criminals 90% of the time. Of course, we don't want dangerous criminals in our streets.
I think I read that 14% of people that are detained have criminal records. Only 14%. That upsets you?
Well, that was the claim originally, that we were going to see, increased safety protocols, and yet there's only been chaos.
And some Democrats in Congress have, maybe some on the progressive wing of the party, have called for abolishing ICE altogether. But you don't agree with that. Is that correct?
No, I don't agree with that as a step. But we do need dramatic overhauls. We do need major reforms. We do need common sense immigration practices. We're going to have immigration in this country. What we don't want is abuses of power. That is what has happened here. Look at across the country. It started last year, and I have not voted for any of this Trump agenda, this legislation that has led to these abuses of power. In fact, I'm not just shouting into a bullhorn. I'm actually doing something about it. I am writing legislation and introducing laws to close these loops that allow the president to deploy the military when local law enforcement and state officials aren't asking for it.
Do you think that ICE can be reformed?
I do think that we can institute accountability. We can get rid of the masks. We can increase, the funding for local law enforcement that is directly responsible for the funding. We can increase the funding for local law enforcement that is directly responsible for safety. We can have common sense. We are not getting that right now from an ill-equipped, unprepared Department of Homeland Security secretary, in an administration that is completely out of touch with what is happening in communities, the fear that we are hearing from Michiganders. And we also can stop, or should stop, this expansion of these detention centers, which I was completely gaslit about when I was up at Baldwin.
And for people who are in Michigan who might not realize that the Baldwin facility is the largest detention center in the Midwest, what do you want them to know about what's happening there and what you're trying to change?
There is so much frustration. There is so much heartbreak. There is outrage because we are not getting answers, because our laws are being abused. People are being exploited. We need safety in our communities, and we need the chaos to stop. What I saw during my visit to the largest ICE detention facility in the Midwest was unacceptable. I saw people in tears. I held a woman in tears. She didn't know why she was there. We need to blow the whistle on this, and we need to change.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate your time for doing this.